How did medieval Europe choose its leaders when kings, lords, priests, and village elders all wanted power, yet ordinary people still had a voice? And why did some of these strange elections involve shouting in the town square, placing stones in bowls, taking oaths before God, or even choosing rulers by accident? To understand the truth, we have to travel back to the edge of Europe, to a small village that held one of the strangest leadership elections recorded in early medieval history, one that shaped more than just a community. It revealed what people feared, what they believed, and what they were willing to risk for a fair leader. Before we dive into the twists of their unusual election, here's something surprising. More than half of medieval European communities didn't follow the king chooses everything model we imagine today. Archaeologists and historians studying local records in France, England, Denmark, and the Germanic world found that villages held something like mini-elections. Not democratic in the modern sense, but early, fragile forms of community decision-making. Some elected elders. Some elected judges. Some chose tax collectors. And some even chose their militia leader. These elections weren't based on ballots. They weren't quiet. They weren't polite. They were loud, emotional, and often decided by who the villagers trusted most to survive winter, war, or hunger. But the way they voted? That's where things get strange. In a world with few written laws, no central police force, and scarce education, people believed truth came from reputation, oaths, and, most importantly, public rituals. And that brings us to the village of Ardenwald, tucked between forest and river in the late 1200s. A place where a new leader had to be chosen not because of celebration, but because of fear. The previous reeve, the local leader who collected taxes, settled disputes, and represented the village to the Lord, had died suddenly during a harsh winter. Some said sickness took him. Others whispered poison. And when fear grows in a medieval village, people look for a leader who can keep them alive. The villagers gathered at the central square before sunrise, when frost still clung to the thatched roofs. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Crows watched from the beams overhead, as if even they sensed something unusual was about to happen. People whispered to one another as they arrived, wrapped in cloaks, stamping cold from their feet. No one wanted to be the first to speak. No one wanted to question who the next leader would be. But everyone knew an election was unavoidable. Without a reeve, the village could fall apart. The aging priest, Father Gerald, stepped forward, leaning on a carved staff. His voice shook not from weakness, but from the weight of what he had to announce. "The manor lord will not choose a reeve for us," he said. "He said the village must decide. He said it is our burden." People murmured anxiously. The older men nodded. They'd heard of villages choosing leaders before. But the younger ones looked confused. Just themselves? Oh, what if they chose wrong? The priest raised his hand. "We will follow the election tradition of our ancestors, the one used before my father and his father and his father's father. But some of you have never seen such a thing. And what you will see today may surprise you." This grabbed their attention. A few villagers exchanged looks. A couple of children whispered excitedly. "Let me explain what must happen," the priest continued, "because this is not the voting you hear about in distant lands. This is the way Ardenwald has chosen its leaders for generations, by oath, by honesty, and by the voice of the people. This is where the election turned from simple tradition into something far stranger, because in Ardenwald, leaders weren't chosen by writing names on parchment or counting hands. They were chosen by a process that mixed faith, fear, superstition, and the logic of survival. And this process began with something surprising: the entire village shouting the name of the person they wanted as loudly as they could. Father Gerald stepped aside, allowing the villagers to gather into a wide circle. Women, men, elders, even children old enough to speak, all would participate. But this was only the first step, and many knew the shouting could get out of hand. In medieval Europe, shouting wasn't just noise, it represented collective will. If one name rose above the rest, the priest believed God had guided the decision. "Speak only names of those you trust," the priest warned, "and trust only those who fear God and carry honesty in their hearts." A hush fell. Breath misted in the cold air. From the front of the crowd, a voice suddenly rang out. Walter the carter. Walter, a broad-shouldered man with quiet eyes, looked stunned. He half shook his head as if he didn't want the responsibility. But then another villager shouted his name. And another. And another. Others shouted different names, Eirik the miller, Tomas the shepherd, even Marin the healer. The sound rolled like a storm across the square, overlapping, clashing, echoing off the houses. In modern elections this would be chaos. But in medieval Europe, it was part of the ritual. The priest listened not for volume alone, but for unity. A name repeated many times mattered more than a few shouted too loudly. When the shouting died down, Father Gerald lifted his staff again. 3 names, he said. 3 voices rise above the rest: Walter, Tomas, and Marin. These will stand for the choice. The villagers nodded. This matched their instincts. Walter was strong and level-headed. Tomas was known for fairness. And Marin, though a woman in a male-dominated era, was respected for her wisdom as a healer. But the election wasn't over. It was only beginning. Next came the strange part, a test called the Oath of Stones. Many medieval European villages used something like it. The candidates would each place their hand on a sacred stone said to punish liars. Not physically, but through community belief. If a leader swore an oath on that stone and later ruled unfairly, people believed terrible luck would fall on the village. Crops would fail. Children would sicken. Wolves would come down from the hills. Superstition? Yes. But in a world without science, this belief kept leaders honest. Father Gerald brought out the stone from the chapel, a smooth river rock darkened by age and oil from countless hands. It was considered the village's most sacred object. Each of you who has been chosen, the priest said solemnly, step forward and swear your oath. Tomas went first. He placed his hand on the cold stone and spoke clearly. If I lead, he said, I will guard Ardenwald as I guard my own family. I will take no bribe. I will show no favoritism. The villagers nodded approvingly. Marin stepped forward next. Her voice was quiet but steady. If I lead, I will heal disputes as I heal wounds, with patience and truth. A few villagers murmured admiration. She had delivered many of their children. Finally, Walter approached. He seemed uncomfortable. Leadership had never been his desire. He was a practical man who preferred to fix wagon wheels and cart grain. But he placed his hand on the stone anyway. If I lead, he said slowly, I will do what must be done. Even when it is hard. There was no applause. Medieval elections didn't work like that. The villagers studied each face, weighing honesty, strength, and reputation. A leader in Ardenwald wasn't someone who simply wanted the job. It was someone the village believed could survive hunger, settle conflict, and keep peace with the manor lord. Now came the final step, the one that made this election truly strange. Every villager had to walk past the candidates, one by one, and place a small pebble in a wooden bowl behind the person they believed should lead. This wasn't anonymous. Everyone saw your choice. And that meant the vote was as much about courage as preference. The priest signaled to begin. The first villager to walk forward was old Bran, a shepherd almost 90 years old. He moved slowly but his choice was firm. He placed his pebble in Marin's bowl. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Some looked surprised. Next came Greta, a widow. She placed her pebble with Tomas, quietly, with the dignity of someone who had weathered many difficult seasons. A group of young men came forward next. They chose Walter. Perhaps they admired his strength. Or maybe they wanted someone who could protect the village if trouble came. The votes continued. Pebbles clinked softly as they fell. Children placed theirs timidly. Elders placed theirs with hesitation or purpose. And through it all, the village watched each other's choices. These were their friends, neighbors, people whose decisions they would remember for years. By the time the last villager voted, the bowls were uneven. Marin had many pebbles, more than most expected. Tomas had a respectable number. Walter's bowl was overflowing. The priest looked troubled. Something wasn't right. He walked forward, examined the bowls, and then lifted Walter's. Some of the pebbles were larger than others. Smooth river stones. A few weren't pebbles at all but small rocks. Heavy. Indisputably placed there by someone determined to make Walter win. But the rule of the election required every pebble to be the same size. They'd been collected the night before for that reason. Someone had tampered with the vote. The villagers erupted with whispers. Who would dare cheat in such a sacred ritual? Cheating wasn't just dishonesty, it was calling down misfortune on the whole village. Father Gerald raised his hand sharply. Silence. Let the truth come to us. The villagers waited, uneasy. Walter looked horrified. Tomas looked suspicious. Marin looked calm as if she had expected this. The priest placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "Did you ask anyone to do this?" "No," Walter said instantly. "I swear it." Walter was honest. Everyone knew this. So if it wasn't him, then who? Suddenly a voice broke through the murmuring. "It was me." A young man stepped forward, Walter's apprentice, Osric. His face was pale with guilt. He couldn't look anyone in the eye. "I did it," he confessed. "I thought Walter was the best choice. I thought, if I helped him win, it would make the village stronger." The villagers gasped again. Cheating was rare, but cheating with stones was a serious offense. Walter turned on him sharply. "Osric, why? Why would you do this?" Osric swallowed hard. "Because you saved my life last winter when I slipped on the ice. No one else came to help. You're the only one I trust." Walter looked pained. Osric was like a younger brother to him. The villagers were torn. Osric's intentions were good, but his actions broke the sacred rules. And in medieval communities, breaking ritual meant risking spiritual punishment. Now the election hung in balance. Father Gerald stepped between the candidates. "We cannot ignore this. But we cannot let fear rule us either. The question now is, what is justice?" And with that, the village felt a quiet dread. This election would not simply be about choosing a leader. It would become a test of fairness, forgiveness, and the strength of their community, the very roots of medieval law itself. What they did next would shape Ardenwald's future, and reveal how medieval Europeans truly balanced power, faith, and responsibility. This is where the story changes, because what comes next is the unexpected twist that forced the villagers to rethink everything they believed about leadership, justice, and the strange way people choose who deserves power. The square went still. The cold morning seemed to press closer, as if even the air around them was waiting to hear what would happen next. The villagers looked at Osric, at Walter, at the bowls filled with stones. Some faces were angry. Some were disappointed. Some were simply afraid. In a small medieval village, a broken ritual wasn't just a mistake, it was seen as an invitation for bad luck. A curse waiting to unfold. And now Ardenwald had to decide whether to fix the ritual, or punish the one who had broken it. Osric's voice trembled. "I meant no harm. I only wanted the right leader." But intent didn't erase consequence. In medieval life, the line between morality and superstition was thin. Every decision was believed to shape the next harvest, the next winter, even the fate of children born that year. Father Gerald stepped forward slowly, turning to the villagers. "The stone oath is sacred. The vote must be pure. But Osric is young. His heart did not seek to deceive for himself. Only for one he admired." This wasn't enough to calm the crowd. A man shouting from the back broke the silence. "If we forgive him, then the stone loses its power." Another villager agreed. "If the ritual loses meaning, then we lose our protection." A woman near the front shook her head. "But he confessed. Doesn't truth matter too?" The debate swelled, people speaking over one another. It was no longer about Osric. It was about what justice meant. About whether rituals were more important than intention. About whether a community could bend rules without breaking itself. Tomas stepped forward, raising his hand. His calm voice cut through the tension. "If we punish Osric harshly, we punish loyalty. That makes no sense. And if we ignore the broken rule?" Eirik the miller countered. "Then we set a worse example." Marin, the healer, watched both men carefully. Her eyes held a stillness, a patience formed from years of tending to wounds both physical and emotional. Finally she spoke. "Perhaps the problem is not Osric," she said, "but the ritual itself." This shocked them. The ritual had been used for generations. Questioning it was like questioning the seasons. Marin went on. "If a single boy could break the ritual so easily, perhaps it is too fragile to rely on. Perhaps we have trusted stones more than wisdom." A ripple went through the crowd. Some murmured agreement. Others frowned. Father Gerald looked troubled. Questioning tradition was dangerous, even for a respected healer. "But what do we do now?" asked a farmer. "We must choose a leader before sunset. The Lord expects a name." And that expectation was real. If Ardenwald failed to elect a reeve, the Lord might choose one for them. Someone cruel, someone oppressive, someone who cared only about collecting taxes, not about the villagers' lives. Marin turned to Osric. "Tell me, why did you think Walter should lead?" Osric hesitated, then spoke honestly. Because he doesn't seek power. He never has. He works harder than anyone. He helps people quietly. He doesn't brag. He doesn't lie. He's the kind of man people listen to without fear. Walter looked away, uncomfortable with praise. But villagers nodded. They had seen these things too. Marin then turned to Tomas. And why should Tomas lead? Tomas straightened slightly. Because I understand disputes. I've helped settle quarrels fairly. I know the Lord's steward. I know what taxes are truly required and which demands are unfair. I have experience. Again villagers nodded. This was true. Tomas had navigated delicate situations before. Finally Marin sighed. And why should I lead? People looked at her with respect. Because you are wise, someone said. Because you care for all of us, said another. But Marin raised a hand. Wisdom does not always make a leader. A healer must mend wounds, not direct battles. But the village knows me and trusts me. That is a heavy weight. Father Gerald took in all of this, his old eyes moving from face to face. We cannot vote again with stones, he said. Not until we restore faith in the ritual. And yet, we cannot let the day pass without choosing. A long silence followed. Then Walter spoke, for the first time with authority. Let Osric's mistake teach us something. Let it remind us that the village's voice must be honest and clear. If stones can be tampered with, then let us vote in a way no one can falsify. Eirik scoffed. Like what? Walter looked around the circle. By standing with the one you choose. Stand beside the person you trust. Let everyone see your choice. No stones. No secrets. No tricks. The villagers froze. This was bold. It was vulnerable. It meant every person would declare their choice publicly, without hiding behind bowls or pebbles. It would reveal alliances, friendships, grudges, fears. It would expose everything. This is why such a method was rare in medieval times. It demanded courage from everyone. Father Gerald studied Walter with a long, serious gaze. You propose a standing election. Walter nodded. The priest looked troubled. This method was used centuries ago when the tribes chose their war leaders. But it was known to divide people. Walter met his eyes. And choosing the wrong leader divides us more. The priest hesitated. But the villagers, strangely, were drawn to the idea. It felt honest. It felt pure. And most of all, it felt necessary. A murmur rose in agreement. Let us do it, said one man. Yes, let us see with our own eyes, said another. Finally the priest lifted his staff. Very well. We will choose by standing. He instructed the 3 candidates to step forward and stand several paces apart. Walter on the left. Tomas in the center. Marin on the right. The villagers formed a wide half-circle, their breaths visible in the cold air, their hearts pounding under their cloaks. Step toward the one you choose, the priest whispered. And let your feet declare your vote. For a long moment no one moved. The stillness felt unreal, as if the village held its breath. Then Greta, the widow, stepped toward Tomas. Slowly, firmly. She placed her hand on his arm and nodded. Old Bran moved toward Marin, limping, leaning on his cane. His loyalty was clear. A few young men stepped toward Walter. Then more. Then 2 women. Then a reluctant farmer. Slowly, carefully, people began moving, choosing the one they trusted with their future. The lines began forming. Tomas gained more supporters. A mix of families who appreciated his calm nature and his ability to deal with the manor lord. Marin gathered the older villagers and those who valued wisdom over strength. But Walter's line grew faster. Not because he campaigned or because he spoke well, but because he represented quiet reliability. Strength without cruelty. Humility without weakness. Yet the count wasn't final. Some villagers stayed frozen. Their loyalties conflicted. Their fears too heavy. A wrong choice could mean hardship for years. Osric remained alone, unsure where to stand. He knew Walter deserved his loyalty, but after causing such trouble, he felt unworthy. Walter noticed. Osric, he said gently. Stand where your heart is, not where you think I want you. Osric swallowed, then walked to Walter. It was a simple step, but it meant everything. Gradually, the last undecided villagers made their choices. When the final person moved, the lines were clear. Walter had the most supporters. Not by a small margin, but by a commanding lead. Father Gerald stepped forward. Walter the Carter, the village has chosen you. But Walter didn't lift his head. Instead he looked at Tomas and Marin. "Tomas," Walter said quietly, "you know the Lord's steward better than any of us. You should advise me on taxes and disputes." Tomas nodded respectfully. "I will." "And Marin," Walter continued, "your wisdom is deeper than mine. You should guide me whenever judgment is unclear." Marin smiled softly. "I will." Walter then turned to Osric. "And you will never again believe that cheating helps anyone. But your loyalty is noted. Stand beside me the right way, honestly." Osric blinked back tears. "I will." The villagers relaxed. The tension that had knotted the morning slowly unraveled into relief. There was no anger, no revenge, no curses, just unity. Father Gerald raised his staff. "Then let the reeve be known. May God witness this choice, not in stones, not in secrets, but in the courage of the people." The crowd murmured assent. But the story did not end there. Over the next months, Walter proved exactly why the villagers had chosen him. He helped resolve disputes fairly. He negotiated with the manor lord for lower grain taxes after a poor harvest. He repaired the village bridge with his own hands. He listened more than he spoke. And because he understood the weight of nearly losing the election to corruption, he made sure transparency became part of every village decision. Tomas became his legal advisor, guiding him through delicate matters. Marin became the village's moral compass, settling disputes before they turned violent. Osric grew into a responsible young man, loyal and hardworking, learning from Walter's example. And Father Gerald? He wrote the entire election in the village record book, calling it The Choosing of the Three Paths. Historians centuries later found that record, a rare insight into how very real medieval communities chose their leaders, and how fragile yet powerful early forms of democracy could be. Over time, other nearby villages heard of Ardenwald's standing election. Some criticized it. Others copied it. And within decades, the idea of choosing local leaders through open, visible support became more common across parts of Europe. It wasn't democracy as we know it today, but it was a step, a quiet, human step, toward letting ordinary people shape their own future. The strangest thing? The ritual that broke that morning, the stone vote that carried generations of tradition, never returned. No one wanted it back. The people had tasted something different, something that felt more honest than superstition. And they held on to it. The story of Ardenwald spread not because of drama or scandal, but because of what it represented. A community willing to question old systems, willing to correct mistakes, and willing to choose leaders based not on fear or ritual or hierarchy, but on trust. That was the real legacy of medieval Europe's strange elections. And for anyone watching today, whether from a quiet home or a busy city, the lesson is simple. Leadership chosen through honesty lasts longer than leadership chosen through secrecy. Trust earned publicly becomes the foundation of a community that survives anything. So if you enjoyed this journey into a forgotten part of medieval history, consider staying with us for more mysteries, truths, and forgotten lessons from the past. And if you want to support the channel and see more of these deep stories come alive, make sure to subscribe. It helps more than you imagine. Let the past teach the present. Let history speak. And may stories like these remind us that the roots of fairness began long before modern law, in small villages on cold mornings, when ordinary people made extraordinary choices.